I want to show you a simple yet highly effective way of editing your landscape photographs in Photoshop and Lightroom. You may have experienced this yourself, or you've heard other people say that the phone takes better pictures than their expensive camera. Well, this is because the phone automatically adjusts the tonal ranges of the shadows and midtones and the highlights to give you the best results in camera. However, when we're shooting in RAW on our mirrorless or DSLR cameras, we have to do the heavy lifting ourselves. This can be quite a daunting task, especially if you're new to photography and just starting out, but I'll show you exactly what settings to use to go from this to this. This tutorial will help you establish and maintain a solid editing workflow in Adobe Camera Raw and ensure you have the highest standard of understanding and editing when it comes to Adobe Camera Raw. This image was shot a few years back along the west coast of South Africa near Cape Town. The image consists of a stark contrast between highlights and shadows, which makes it tricky to expose the camera properly in order to get the best dynamic range. In this case, I chose to expose for the highlights, thus saving the details in the brightest part of the image and hopefully recovering the shadow details in Photoshop. Luckily, with the advent of technology, modern mirrorless cameras have such a wide dynamic range now, making it easier to recover shadow detail and balancing the image properly. So let's take a look in Photoshop now to see how we can easily bring back the details in Camera Raw. Okay, so I've opened up Adobe Photoshop, and obviously within it is Camera Raw. So whenever you open up an image, a RAW file within Photoshop, it'll automatically open up Adobe Camera Raw. I'm using the latest version of Photoshop as of August 9th, 2024. And first things first, we're going to look at the image here. This is what we've got. Nothing's been changed. Everything is straight out of camera at the moment. So we're about to do some changes here. And as you can see, this is quite a contrasted scene. Hardly getting any detail here in the rocks. Quite a bit of detail here in the highlights. As I said, I exposed for the highlights. So that is something to consider as well. Let's have a look. So first thing, what I normally do is I check that my Adobe RAW preferences is set to 16-bit. Most cameras nowadays shoot in 12 to 14-bit as a RAW file. So if not, just open that up, just click on that bit there and this dialog window will open up, and make sure you click on 16-bit. Give Photoshop enough color gamut to work and process the actual colors in your image, and make sure we've got these reds and oranges intact so it doesn't lose any detail in those. Now this was shot on a Canon 450D, so it's obviously not the best digital camera out there, but unfortunately my 5D gave in at that point and the shutter mechanism broke after years and years of using it. So I was forced to use a backup camera. So the 450D it was. On the right hand side, you can see I shot this image in ISO 100 using a Canon 1635 f2.8. Shot this at f16 for 30 seconds. So I obviously used a full-on ND filter here just to get the slow shutter speed and to just sort of create this beautiful misty look on the water itself. Now, let's head right into the first bit, and that is your color profile setting over here. Normally tend to go Adobe Landscape and just pushes those colors a bit, and you can see that it's actually enhanced the shadow detail as well. Let's go back to Adobe Color. You can see immediately, if you keep an eye on histogram over here, it immediately just sort of flattens it out a bit more, and you get a bit more detail in the shadows and as well in the highlights. Alright, so let's head on over to our exposure. So I'm going to just gently increase the exposure over here. No, that's not what we want to do really. That's a bit counterproductive, but I just want to see what detail I've got here in the shadows. Now you can see we do have a bit of grain here. It's just the sensor on the 450D is not exactly the best, but we'll take care of that a little bit later on. So we've increased the exposure. Now I'm going to just check contrast slightly, small tweaks. I'm going to bring down the highlights as well. I always tend to take it too far and then just bring it back ever so slightly just to have a look, see where we're at. So saying about minus 18, minus 20 or so should be good. And then we can always push the blacks a bit more as well. So yet again going over and then bringing it back down, because we don't want an unnatural contrast. It's kind of giving off that fake HDRI feel from early 2000s. It's not what we really want. But again, plus 17. All right. Now heading into color, this is where you can set your color temperature. Now this was shot as in the camera. We can set this to daylight as well, which will produce a warmer setting. I quite like that. But if you want to, you can make it a cooler image, or you can bring it up and it's going to be quite hot. Yeah, I'd say we can keep it as daylight balanced. Maybe a little bit less. Let's do it. 5,000. That should be good. I'm also going to switch on above my histogram here. You see these two little buttons here. One is for shadow clipping and one is for highlights. So immediately you can see as I switched on the shadow clipping, these blue dots appear. Now that's just showing me where my blacks are crushed. So where there's no detail in the blacks at all. So we can fix that if we need to by bringing the blacks up slightly. You do want some black bits here and there, obviously, otherwise it's a bit unnatural. So that should be good. So head back to color. I'm going to leave the tint as is, and I'm just going to slightly increase my vibrance. Immediately there you can see it's bringing up my highlight warning. So it's actually overexposing those particular colors. We don't go crazy with these. If you keep an eye on the histogram there as well, you can see the red levels rising quite substantially. So about plus 6 or so should be fine. Yeah. Again, for saturation, I tend not to use too much saturation in images, but I think maybe a plus 2 should be all right. Heading into effects, we can up the clarity slightly. That's just a mid-tone contrast, really. That's all it really does, as you can see there. We don't need to really go overboard with this. Plus 10 or plus 12, so it should be fine. And then lastly, the dehaze. So you can either dehaze it completely, removing any kind of volumetric fog if you've got anything in the image, or you can add it and create those beautiful dreamy looks. Again, I'm just going to leave it at about 8, minus 8. So that should be good. So that's our before, and that's our after. So we've already got loads of detail back in the shadow area. And that looks a bit more true to eye. Alright, so curves, I'm generally not going to worry too much about curves. We can, if you need to, add in a gentle S curve there. And then our hue and saturation, This is really only if you want to change any of the colors in there. Don't really want to bump it up too much. I quite like the natural look of it already. It's quite monotone already, and there's not much else in this scene, to be honest. There you go. I'm going to look at detail over here, and I specifically want to get rid of this noise we saw earlier. So can use the AI denoising if we need to. I'm just going to see what the luminance does to combat sort of just this noise here. A little bit of color noise as well. We're not going to get better than that really without losing detail in the actual brighter bits. And it's unfortunately just the sensor itself. Yeah, that's already looking a bit better. So I'm going to leave it at that. Optics, I am going to always click the remove chromatic aberration, it just in case, especially on the edges. Let me just switch off the highlight warning there. On the edges, you do tend to sometimes get chromatic aberration. Not so much in this image, but it's so low. Yeah, see, there you go. So you do get a bit of chromatic aberration, especially in the corners of the image, but just switching that on simply eliminates it. So you can see the before and after as I toggle the switch over there. Does a great job of handling the chromatic aberration. Next up, we can do some profile corrections as well. There we go. So that just removes any sort of distortion from the lens itself, just using built-in lens profiles. I can go in and add another vignette as well if I need to. Does sometimes help just to center the image a little bit there, so I'll do that right about there. All right. After we're done there, another often overlooked feature of Camera Raw is the calibration. Now, this is simply a panel to alter the way Camera Raw interprets the colors coming from the raw file itself. So if we wanted to change the values of the red, for example, we can. I'm not going to mess with it too much. It's quite nice, but I can bring it up if need be. Again, I think it looks quite nice just the way it is. If we want to introduce a bit more red, maybe just slightly, and just... All right. Now that we're done there, I'm just going to correct my horizon as well. I'm just going to see what auto does and see if it fixes it. It's not perfect though. Just going to drag this across using the straightener tool, and that should hopefully, yep, that's done the trick. All right, so we've got a straight horizon, we've got a lot more contrast. So that's our before, that's our after. And we can see we've still got loads of detail, the clouds, the shadows. But now we can start using local contrast adjustments. And by that, I mean we can start doing some masking. Masking is really, really nice. So I can isolate certain parts of the image and brighten or darken those parts, those isolated parts in the image, to just make sure I've got the most I can get out of this image in terms of dynamic range. So I'm going to just use a radial gradient on the first step and just going, just going to go over there for start. just see what I can do with that dark part there. I just want to bring out some of that rocky texture in there. Make sure my feathering's all the way to the max. And I'm just going to gently increase my exposure. So immediately you can see we've got detail just over here. Now, I know it's grainy and all that. It's fortunately just one of those things with this camera. Can increase the clarity slightly as well, just to bring focus to that area. Do a little bit of noise reduction there as well. That with a bit of sharpening. And we should be good on that part. Now we can carry on doing this for certain parts of the image. These rocks in the background as well, they also do with a bit of detail. Actually, I might use a brush for this part. So I'll delete that and just go over that brush and just making sure that my brush settings are okay. So the feathering's all the way to the 100% just to make sure everything sort of blends in, so there's no hard edges on the brush, as that'll be quite obvious on the image as to where I've brushed already. Our flow is about 20%, and that should be good. And just using the bracket keys, left and right brackets, I can increase and decrease the brush size. So I'm going to start gently just brushing across. Then you'll see a red mark appear. And that is essentially my mask area. So doing it quite rough now, but I'm sure you get the idea. So nothing's been applied to this mask yet, but we're going to start doing that in a second by just pushing the exposure up again slightly. There's not much there actually in terms of detail, unfortunately. Let's have a look. Push that quite a bit. Should be good though. See if we increase our shadows a bit. Bring in a bit of clarity. That should do the trick. Right. And then next up, I want to introduce a bit more detail into my foreground as well. So I'm going to take another brush and just slightly increase the brush size this time and just brush over the areas that I want to change. If you've made a mistake and you've gone over an edge, you can always hit Control or Command Z and it will undo your last brush stroke. So if you've made a bit of an error, you can always go back. Alright, so let's decrease my brush size there. That should do the trick. I'm not going to go over the highlights. I want to keep the highlights at that exposure it's currently at. Right, let's have a look. So if I increase the exposure now, it's looking better. Don't want to do it too much. Obviously, it's going to look a bit fake if I do. That's far too much. We're just going to bring it down. There we go. And again, we can look at the before and the after. Before, after. And that's already a massive, massive change to the image. And we've already increased the dynamic range so much and brought detail to all the shadow areas while retaining our highlights. We can take this a step further and just add a bit of atmosphere as well. So again, I'm going to select my brush tool, and just on the horizon there, just behind those rocks, I'm just going to gently, I'm just actually going to bring my flow down a little bit and just start brushing in, just gently over here. Taking care not to go over that rock too much. I am doing it a bit rough now, but you get the idea. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to add in a little bit of dehazing. Honestly, that's too much. I just want to see what my mask was doing there. So it's quite a nice way to make sure you've masked in the correct areas by turning the effect on to the max and seeing where you can improve a little bit more. Alright, so bring back the dehaze a bit now. And I can always bring up blacks as well. So all that really does is just add a little bit of haze to my my horizon. I mean, I can always add it here as well in the foreground, just around these rocks a little bit. It's just going to help a little bit with atmosphere and a little bit of mood. So let's look at the before and after. There we go. Lastly, I just want to make sure our sky is good. So I'm just going to select the sky. And it takes a little while to think about it. There we go. So our sky is selected. Let's see what happens if we decrease. Let's just switch on my highlights and shadow warning lights. So even though it's clipping there, I would leave it as is, because the sun is quite bright and that naturally there wouldn't be any detail in this section here anyway because of the sun's exposure. So we're going to leave it like that. I might bring it down ever so slightly, by about half a stop. Just want to see what that does. We're okay. I think that looks good. I'm quite happy with that. It's a very, very quick and easy adjustment to make. But if you look at how much that's added, let me just switch off the warnings. If you take a look at how much just a few simple tweaks have added to this image to really bring out the colors and really bring out the atmosphere and the dynamic range of, even though it's a 450D, but bring out the dynamic range of that little sensor. Just amazing what you can do. And I keep in mind that I exposed for the highlights in this scene, and I still managed to gather about a stop or two of shadow detail in here as well. Obviously with modern day cameras, mirrorless cameras and all that, you'll get a lot more or a lot better results out of this. I know for a fact something like a Fuji GFX 100, you can at least get about two extra stops of shadow detail out of there. It could be black and you can still recover it with very minimal noise, which is fantastic. So it all looks good. I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to go over it quickly again and we can see what we've done. So immediately you can see I have, if I go back to my main adjustment, my global adjustments, I've made global adjustments to the exposure. So I've brightened the entire image up. I've added a slight bit of contrast to it, even though we're trying to regain shadow detail. I've removed the highlights slightly, just to bring back detail in the clouds over here. especially closer to the sun. And I've pushed my blacks a bit to bring back detail in these dark areas around the rocks. Then I've gone into my color. I've decreased or actually increased color temperature slightly, as well as the vibrance and the contrast. Keep in mind, these are all global adjustments, so not localized. The masks are known as local adjustments. That's just to certain parts of the image, whereas these are global adjustments and they affect every part of the image. So carry on from that, I've added a bit of clarity. I've added a bit of dehaze. So clarity, again, just pushes that mid-tone contrast just slightly. And dehaze as well, just removes contrast and makes it a bit flatter, but it adds a bit of texture and atmosphere to the overall image as well, which is quite nice. Especially for long exposures, it helps, especially with things like this you see around here. Long exposure of waves crashing against the rocks. Carry on from that. We've added a slight S-curve to that, even though it's not really necessary. The color mixer, I've just done very, very slight adjustments to the orange channel. Nothing else in there as well. I'm quite happy with the color, as I said. So same with color grading, I've left that as is, but obviously it depends from photo to photo. If you feel like your image needs a bit of color grading, then by all means go for it. Sharpening, I've not touched actually, but if you need to, you can add a bit of sharpening to the image itself by increasing the radius of the sharpening. You can also introduce a bit of masking around it. All this really does is the sharpening introduces a bit of a halo sometimes around contrasted edges such as that. If I blow this up all the way, you can see what I'm talking about. Now what the masking does is it actually goes around it in certain areas and tries its best to sort of eliminate that hard edge around the mask with that halo that it creates. But I'm not actually going to sharpen it that much. That should be fine. There you go. So that's it. That should be fine. I did add a bit of manual noise reduction just on the luminance channel, just to get rid of the noise here. Try my best to, at least. It's not great, but it's a lot better than what it was. So I'll keep it at that. Then lastly, at optics, or second last, optics, we've got remove chromatic aberration, just to remove the chromatic aberration around these rocks here on the edge. And I've added a slight vignette as well. Can actually go a bit stronger on that vignette. Right, and from there we went into calibration and we tweaked the oranges slightly, just to add a bit of warmth and color in this image. A little bit more than it had. And that's really it. Small iterations, small little steps really helps build up an effective image, and it really helps you expand that dynamic range. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions or any tips of how I can improve this workflow, please leave it in the comments below. Really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.